Hello, all the students, ladies and gentlemen. It is unfortunate that we have to do this class of the week 10 now, which is basically we had a spring break and then we had the extended 1 week time adding to it. So we now, instead of 17 weeks, we have 15 weeks, and the remaining, I would say, about 8 weeks of teaching or classes will have to be here online, which I guess is a good decision that to reduce the chances of getting the virus. And of course, in evidence, I would say I confine myself to this residential space of my own. So my indigenous style of haircut was the product of my first attempt on self-sufficient haircut, and I hope that's not against the dress code of teaching professionals by the standard of University of Houston. So anyway, since we don't have the coursework assignments turning today, which basically was by the instruction of University of Houston, it was extended with 1 more week. So we do not have the routine of every class to address the course assignments. So anyway, we're going to approach directly to the core contents teaching, which for this week, it is about ocean carriage or the strategic management of ocean carriages. It's basically rolled over from what originally to be week 9. So anyway, let's go just right to it. Now, as I've been repeatedly pointing out, for most part, our class has been teaching for the role plays of primarily 1PL, 4PL, and sometimes, 3PL. But obviously, ocean carriages are all about the service operations provided by ocean carriers, which is a big 2PL. This is basically to tell you guys we're not teaching anything like how to design the trade routes, the ports of call, profitability of each voyages and all that. Basically you're not attending Maritime Academy. This is not really your, I guess, alley per se. But you would definitely need to learn a lot about the ocean carriages. Why? Because basically ocean carriage is very typically the common, what we call main carriage, as versus, basically, before the load port, it will be the pre-carriage, and after the discharge port would be the on-carriage. So the main carriage is between the load port and discharge port. So when we talk about the ocean carriages, what would first come to your mind or mine? Well, first of all, we have to understand what kind of ocean carriages are we talking about. Is it a break bulk, or is it the liquid bulk, or is it dry bulk, or is let's say a containerized, or even let's say a liquid bulk? We would have the chemical product and liquid gas and crude oil, oil products refined. So everything's very, very different. But for most of you guys, I would say at least you need to learn a thing or two about the container liner services and some, break bulk liner services, which does exist on certain trade routes, in certain capacities. So first, let's move to, the basic contract format for the general shippers, which in many cases you guys, or some of you, or I hope most of you would become shippers, who basically use the services of the steamship lines. In this case, first let's talk about the container lines. There is a contract format that not necessarily limited to container shipping. It could be actually in many cases it also apply to the breakbulk shippings, which is called the COA, which we generally or briefly discussed a little bit before in the previous classes. COA refers to the contract of affreightment, and it can be structured as FEA, the Enterprise Framework Agreement, which is basically a long-term agreement. At many companies, either they call it category management or strategic sourcing, but what do we know about the contract of affreightment in essence? Well, as mentioned before, it is basically for the shippers to not necessarily a legal commitment, but somehow a promise of certain amount of cargo defined, quantified, offering to the steamship lines over a certain period of time of a specified span, let's say 18 months, 24, whatever, you know what I mean. But you don't want it to be 10 years because it's going to be very difficult to execute. And in exchange for that, the steamship lines are supposed to offer, one, a rate that is better than market, which of course the market goes up and down. So how do you know what is the better than market rate? Because the market rate goes up and down, right? But you lock into certain rate of the freight rates. So that part has to be checked all the time. And that's what people call market analysis. What it means is, hey man, you gave me this rate of, let's say, random number, $100 for argument's sake, and that was in the agreement. And now, wow, the market rate is 150. Oh yeah, I'm gonna try to secure this rate, but the steamship lines they'll try to get out of it, not from the agreement, but they'll not give you the commitment of booking. So that comes to the second part of this COA, essential points. So rate, we already talked about it. It's not necessarily a solid advantage, but what you do want is actually commitment of the booking, right? So when the rate, the steamship lines offered in your COA, when it is higher than the contract rate, most likely they would always have some excuse to tell you they're gonna roll over, roll back, whatever, basically saying we don't have any spaces left for this voyage, but we'll try to put it on the next voyage, which whatever the service frequency is, let's say weekly, bi-weekly, or whatever, even monthly. And of course, if you can wait, or when the rate they offered in this agreement is actually, higher than the going rate in the market, oh yeah, you have no problem to fill out their space, because it could be probably half empty, as pretty much it is today. So that is in essence what a COA is all about. But when you try to put together COA, most often what would become something really important for you is to know what is the differences between all these, what they call ocean carriers, right? And of course, if you really want to do a good job, you don't want to include any, what they call it, NVOCC, which is non-vessel operating common carrier, meaning if you sit in the home, you're operating the whole thing by yourself, but you have a tariff filed with FMC, and pretty much you get it from John and you sell to Jack, and then you're the middleman in between the bills of lading coming into you, and you issue your own bills of lading, right? So the shipper, they need to make sure tomorrow you're still in the business. So that is what MVOCC is all about. Of course, are there any big MVOCCs? Yes, they are. Like 10,000 employee big MVOCC. Yes, but still, what's the point? Even you know better, you don't need them. You just go straight to the vessel operating common carrier instead of a non-vessel operating common carrier, right? So other than that, what about all those guys own ships and operate them on the different trade routes? Are they all the same, or how different are they? And where are they different? Well, you can differentiate them first by the service type. There are always some kind of liners, which basically, by the definition, they operate the ships on fixed schedules, meaning on certain day or date of a month, they would have their ship calling on certain port, and all the certain ports connected to become a trade route. So all the liner services are operating over certain trade route. Some do go all around the world. One little voyage would take half a year, 180 some days. Some people do need it actually, but most shippers won't. So typically, the longer transit time, the shorter service frequency, you should and you would expect lower freight rate, because that's lower cost on the carrier side. But then all the container services, inliner service, all of them almost are dedicated to certain trade routes, like Trans-Pacific, which basically from Asia to Americas, and the Transatlantic, which is basically trading between the U.S. East Coast and sometimes some part of U.S. Gulf, Texas, Louisiana, all that. Alabama, trading between there and the European ports, and of course, basically between Asia, or specifically China and West Africa, and then Latin America, which is not a big trade route because not too many cargoes going there. But yes, there are some. Typically, they're just like air, traffic. There's some hot trade zones, and then there's some, less crowded traffic. So you would have to find, who is offering exactly what that is actually you need. So when you do this strategic sourcing or category management, you need to be able to differentiate all the different carriers and see their differences. For instance, some offer weekly service, which might be great for you if you need shorter transit time. Well, actually, not transit time, but if you miss the first boat, the next one is only a week away, rather than waiting for a month away, let's say. But the reason I mentioned transit time is when you have more ships putting into the service of one certain trader route to commit to a good short service frequency, the transit time can be shorter. Why? Because you have more ships and you can cover different ports. When you have less ships, you have to cover more ports on the same route. So the transit time becomes longer. So anyway, That's two key criteria: the service frequency and transit time, right? And now, beyond that, that was basically service operation type indifferences. There are also ship type differences. So why would that matter? If we're not talking about container, but we're talking about, let's say, either mining or heavy industry or oil, gas, and chemical industry shipping needs, you may need a little bit container trade. But for most part, what you need is what we call heavy lift breakbulk ships. Now, what is heavy lift? When the ship gear is above and beyond 50 metric tons per crane, single. And of course, typically they have 2 or 3 cranes, and they say, combined, meaning when the two cranes working together, 50, but it's not automatically just add to 100. There's what I mentioned earlier, the outreach ratio, meaning the further you extend out, the less lifting capacity you would expect reliably. So if you know your capital equipment weighs more than 200, 300, or even 400 pounds, those ships with the gears that's 100 or 100, even 150 metric ton per crane, they may not be able to lift it. And just because they have that crane lifting capacity supposedly, up there, but what if your equipment is so long and it gets on, what they call on-deck storage and situated between the cranes, and you cannot even, effectively mobilize your cranes to lift it. So the dimension actually matters, on top of the weight of each unit of your capital equipment to be moved. So this is the case. You have to look at what type of ship actually could fit, your cargo. So typically today, when you go on to the website of all those heavy lift, professionally, the heavy lift breakbulk steamship lines, you can always review their list of the fleet, all the ships, okay? What they have is professionally called the general arrangement, which detailed everything you need to know about the ship, structure and the gear and all that. So when you look at that, you see the space and how the deck and the cargo space, the cargo hold, dimensions. You have to basically do your calculation. Of course, if you're I hope if you're a maritime graduate, you know how to calculate that. But this is typically the job of a good port captain. And so, by the way, you always need a good port captain. They can tell you a lot of things you need to know than the otherwise expert consultant could tell you. It's something solid you need to know, okay? So you need to hire the right ship. So what is the right ship? The physical dimension and the capacity, because the deck has to be designed to be able for a certain payload, basically the distributed weight over, let's say, per square inch. So your stuff is not going to basically damage their main deck or something, or the cargo hold. And they can be fit in there. And other things, basically by knowing that, you have your peace of mind for the basic part. And then, of course, there are other technical jobs, which we don't need to get into, because all you need is a good port captain for that part, right? So we just talked about the subcategories of the steamship lines, basically differentiate them by their service operation type they offer, and the fleet of specific types of ships they have. Excuse me, the drafts, going into the ports of load and discharge, it's going to work. Of course, that's their part of job too. But then you need to know about the gears and their cargo holds. In most cases, these are what they call twin deckers, because there's there's a main deck, and then there's this deck here, and in between is called upper cargo hold, and then in below here it's called, you know, lower cargo hold. So typically you would have this somewhere around 6 meters. This is like between 4 and 5 meters. And then, you know, going between here and there is about 11 to 13 meters. So you calculate your own cargo, how to best utilize the space. That's optimization there. If you have enough cargo to, you know, bring a private charter, you probably don't need anything else. That's one, safer, two, economically better off. But you have to be an expert to know what you're doing, right? Most people don't. They go to 3PL, and I'm sorry, a lot of 3PLs don't know what they're doing, okay? So let's just move on to okay, we're going to talk about the trade routes, the voyages, the ports connecting, and what else? So now we already know the differences between the break bulk, or different kind of bulk, and then the container ships. So when you, basically the easiest part is container, right? Why? Because, hey, there's always like a service contract, which is basically the template you borrow, you know, copy paste, not too much differences. It is under the jurisdiction of, you know, Federal Maritime Committee, and the tariff is monitored by the FMC. You know, basically there's not too many, I guess, funny things going on there, and you don't really have a whole lot to negotiate about. But that is basically under the Shipping Act. I think originated from the first one probably in 1982, and then keep updated with the newer versions. I lost the track of it. But hey, if you are curious, you can look it up. You know, that's what Google is there for. But then we talk about a break bulk. Now that's more challenging because, one, break bulk is under the you know, exemption of antitrust, which is a big deal in America. And that actually, you have to look at that shipping, that's called the Common Goods by Sea Act or something like that, from way earlier, probably 1932. Don't quote me on that. You can, again, Google up on that. Okay, so that's the law in America. The English law is somewhat, you know, similar, but the difference between the UK system and the US system is, in the UK, they protect the steamship lines a lot more in their jurisdiction and their legal practice, whereas in the USA, we protect the shippers. You know, God bless your heart if you're a shipper, you want to be in the US to do all your, you know, lawsuits on the maritime thing, and there's no state or local maritime, you know, court. All the maritime law enforcement and the judgment and everything, they're within the federal jurisdiction, okay? It's all federal courts. But that's why we don't have too many maritime lawyers here. It's not really a good business to be in the U.S. to practice maritime law. So, having said all that, the contract format for the break bulk shipping is called charter party. Now, this, I would tell you, there are not that many qualified chartering party negotiators in this country, in the USA. Not really. Actually, it's a very small circle. The funny part is you don't need any like a certificate or license from anybody. But if you dare to do that trade, somebody would knock at your door if you mess it up. So what is a charter party? Charter party is a private contract, right? everybody, if you're in the breakbulk business, because all the different ships, like oil tanker, or let's say the dry bulk carrier, let's say for grain, right? Or say for break bulk, what are we just talking about? It's all different charter parties. So for break bulk, the charter party format is called Jinkan. Okay, Jinkan again, is originated from probably, I don't know, 200 years ago. But it has been, updated, and updated. But the main thing is boringly unchanged, okay, from like 200 years ago. So if you are a qualified player in chartering game, and you are, at least you believe you are some sort of expert in charter party negotiating, at least you almost remember everything about the main terms, right? So main terms, yeah, there's not a whole lot to negotiate in the main term. It's all in the rider clauses, which is basically adding up to, I don't remember, like 15 or 16 main terms, and then you start to add the... So if you're a good charter party negotiator, you're very good at the rider clauses, because there's something that you don't really change at all. There's things that you have to negotiate the terms. To be able to negotiate charter party, to do a first-class job, one, you have to be really good in maritime law, specifically for this, okay? If you are a maritime lawyer and all you do is container trade, I'm sorry, you're not going to be qualified to do this, because you won't under the thing. You look at charter party, you think you do, but what the heck does that mean? You may not. So main terms, rider clauses, okay, Google it up, and then I don't really expect you to actually negotiate, but God bless you, you need to find someone who does understand how these things works. So at least you need to appreciate the difficulties of this, the challenge, which is basically to protect, a good charter party protect you from all the possible incidences, by experience. That's why a good charter party negotiator is good, because all that experiences. A lot of them have 30 years experiences, okay? So that was about charter party. Let's see what else is on the menu today to serve. Okay. So the charter party. And then what about the liner, but break bulk shipping, right? We know in Houston there are at least two, all the time going to Europe. They're on like not Europe, but Asia, the Trans-Pacific trade. Today, almost nobody wants to remain on the transatlantic trade. Not too much business, but anyway. So when you do the, actually, there's actually one even to Latin America. They have a regional headquarters based here in Houston. So when we deal with the liners, the good part is for you guys, not a at least not a maritime graduate, which does not automatically warrant them with a good charter party negotiator position. But in any case, for you guys, the supply chain management graduate, booking notes, I'm sure you can handle that. So basically, there's not a whole lot to negotiate there. It's pretty much standardized. The format and the terms are pretty much accepted by most people. So that doesn't mean you don't change anything. You do, certain things. But the difference between the booking notes and charter party is the long form with everything and anything, full of risks, and you need to know what you're doing to mitigate what risks and how, right? Very technical. Whereas booking notes, yeah, any fat jack can do it, or thin ones. So how does that relate to bills of lading? Well, bills of lading is a very formal piece of legal document. It has all the terms there on the back. You better pay attention, because that's how and where and when the steamship lines get themselves off the hook. So you need to pay attention there. But basically, they would typically stipulate, who basically has the power over who in between the charter party or booking node and bills of lading, right? So pay attention to read there. And now, what is a bareboat charter? Bareboat charter is the subject of your charter party is only on a boat and boat only. You don't need any crew to come with it or her. And some people do charter bareboat and operate and become the operator without owning the ship, right? In most cases, you will not need it. And then what is a time charter? The time charter is regardless the voyage. Let's say between here, I planned a voyage between the port of the City Dock, Houston, and port of Shanghai. And I stopped by Singapore. I'll stop by Kawasaki, Japan, and Busan, Korea, blah, blah, right? So that's a voyage. So if I do the voyage charter, I will start hire at the commencement of the voyage and end the hire after the discharge at the last port of call, right? But a time charter is over a specific period of time, let's say 12 months, 18 months. So it's totally irrelevant about the voyage. It's transparent to the ship owner. You're taking the ship away, off my hands. So you start to pay on this day, and the last day of pay is that day. So it's basically a specified number of days. I don't care how many voyages. However, even the time charter, there's always some clause to restrict your trade route. They won't let you just, I have the time charter so I can take her anywhere. No. If this is an area that is very notoriously known for piracy, or there's a geopolitics, heat up area where the war risk is very obvious there, they may exclude you to have it as the trade zone, and they will list that there. So that's a time charter, right? So we will often hear the terms about the shippers, the charterers, the consignees, the owner-operators. Well, the shippers are the guys or the ladies at the loading port. They basically deliver their cargo under the hook, the ship hook, the hook of the ship crane, right? That's called shippers. And the parties on the other side, the receiving end, who receive the cargo, they're consignees. Because the shipper consigned the cargo to them. The charterers are the party who chartered the ship in a private charter. Okay, the whole ship is mine for the voyage or for the time. So forget about the shippers or consignees. Basically, the relationship is defined under charter party between the ship owners or operator. Remember the bareboat charter. Okay, so basically that's what it is. If it is a charter party, basically charterer, owner / operator, right? So I hope that covered why they need a chartering broker and how much did they pay for the brokerage. Okay, I heard some professors are talking about how nice to be a chartering broker. I just mentioned earlier, it is not that easy. Okay, the good part is you don't lose your shirt, but somebody might just kill you. I'm kidding, but it's not that easy to get into that trade. Okay, you have to have the credential. But why would anybody need a chartering broker? Because most guys, I said, the chartering business, especially the broker, is a very small circle. So most shippers or even charterers, they don't understand the charter party on the technical nitty-gritty, details. So they need to bring the charter broker to work in between the ship owner and charterer to help pave the road, secure the trade, and document the agreement achieved on every single line of those lengthy documents of charter parties. So yes, it is a good business, but not everybody could get in. For the general break bulk, the brokerage is about 1.25% of the freight or the charter per charter party, okay? But for heavy lift project cargo, which project cargo requires heavy lift break bulk, it's double. It's 2.5%. And that's what your instructor is used to, because that has been my trade. Heavy lift break bulk charter broker. So how do one place 2PL ocean service providers under carriers category? Wait, how do one place them? Okay, let me read through this whole thing. Oh, okay. So I guess basically, when we talk about a carrier, we just have to, understand it's a it's a bulk. And under bulk, you have the dry bulk, break bulk, liquid bulk, blah, blah. And then, or is it a, container? And then the liner, non-liner. So what does express ocean bills of lading mean, and what would be the risks? Well, for that part, we already mentioned before. I'll just repeat a little bit here. Basically, if you release the cargo under your custody as the steamship lines to the shipper, or I'm sorry, the consignee, you're undertaking the legal risks. This is just like, you give the money to somebody, right? And you, in your own goodwill, you believe that somebody is entitled to it. But then there's somebody else coming and say, why did you give my money to somebody else? Okay, you'll be in trouble. So when you do that, express ocean bills of lading, that is in absence, you release, of the original bills of lading, you were supposed to, against that, to release cargo, but you didn't. You release cargo without the original bills of lading, you are undertaking the risk. So I would typically insist, the party wanted me to do that, express ocean bills of lading, will give me a letter of, basically indemnifying me from taking any responsibility to hold me entirely harmless and that kind of thing. So how would LC relate to the bills of lading releasing? Basically, in most cases, the LC negotiation basically say, I present this, so I'm drawing on the payment because this is the cargo I'm selling, right? So what's the evidence of your, cargo being shipped to the receiving site? Bills of lading. The bills of lading is the document that serves as evidence that you are actually having the cargo off your hand going to the other side. Without bills of lading, it's basically your words against his, right? So when you negotiate LC, that's, if you're the seller, you're selling someone in Vietnam or Indonesia, and they don't trust you, of course you don't trust them. So the bank over there work with the bank over here, right? So your bank takes in your bills of lading presented to the other bank, and the other bank gives the money to your bank. So that's how they are related. Why the charter parties for the break bulk, especially heavily specialized trading within a very small circle? Well, I already covered that. Let me just go further. So why would a maritime lawyer specialize in, I just mentioned that before, so that's okay. Here's something you do need to know. What do you think would be the trend for the container ship owner and operators to see? Not for you, for them to see. Because today, the container ship sizes. I'm talking about the container carrying capacity, several thousand containers per ship, right? And even with all that giant container ships, they still didn't have enough space. So what they were doing, they were having the carrier space sharing agreement. Basically, it's like, okay, I can take booking and put my containers, loaded containers onto your ships, and you can do the same with me, back and forth. Now, because the trade dropped down, thanks to our dear President Donald Trump, the trade war and everything else, not too much trading going on. So the cargoes are on the declining trend. And so are they still going to be able to use all that big ships? That actually, the operating cost is higher. So I would suggest that the ship, they're going to carry less, in capacity designation, they're going to carry less per voyage. And so as far as how the project cargo experts pick the best ship for a particular project voyage, that we just mentioned before. And so I'm just going to mention a little bit on the tanker and LNG charter. Basically, those are a lot easier because just a couple of pages. It's called world scale. So basically, the pay rate is all in sort of like a scale or tariff. So you just say blah 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 100 or blah 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 110. That's negotiation. The terms you don't really negotiate. Okay, and lots of time they even just went ahead. The ship already sailed when they're still trying to ink the documents. So I'm just saying that's a lot easier, even though it's also a small circle. But technically, there's not a whole lot to negotiate. So here's another term about the break bulk shipping. People say top off. What's top off? Top off is like your ship, the draft, let's say, is very typically break bulk draft is about 10 meters, required for a bigger break bulk ship. But then you came into the area where, let's say, where I'm trying to give you, well, Freeport is very, very deep, water port, but there are other part around Houston, they're like 6-meter draft. So what do? The main carriage would have to end before physically reaching the discharge port. So they send a barge in. So by the side, basically take things off the main carriage, bigger vessel into the barge with the, operative, if this is possible physically, basically lift off from the big ship to the barge. A lot of companies such as GE, they don't like that idea because that's a process, of risk when transferring. We call it transshipment, between the big ship and the small barge. But sometimes, if the equipment is not that fragile, or it's some other cargo, so you could do it. And transshipment is what I just mentioned. And what is a feeder service? Feeder service is like, okay, today there, we probably will see the going back trend to the earlier days, which are basically between the hub port and the final destination, the smaller ships will basically service, just like when you fly from Houston to Bangor, Maine, where my academy was, you never have the direct flight, at least in my days. You would basically, fly into Boston, a bigger plane, and then you switch into a teeny tiny toy kind of airplane, and going from Boston, you fly into Bangor, Maine, right? So that part is called a feeder, that smaller one, or we call it second leg or something like that. So let's see. What about service contract? Service contract is very easy. Basically, the template, copy, paste, change a little bit necessary. That's it. Let's see. If nothing else, we'll move to the thing itself. Yeah, okay. Let me move to the PowerPoint. Now you need to take out the PowerPoint and referring to it while I'm going through with that. Okay, so let's start with the first one. Subcategories by ship types, which I already mentioned verbally. Over here, all you have to do is basically, go through the words here in region context. Let's see here. Oh, I need to talk about a Ro-Ro because that I didn't mention. Ro-Ro is the kind of ship. Okay, we were talking about, the ship gears, the cranes. Those are called a Lolo. Okay, lift on, lift off. Ro-Ro means roll on and roll off. They don't have cranes, right? So there are several types of Ro-Ro ships. One is we sometimes could see in the Houston city dock. It's basically the ships that come in with several decks, and this particular ship, often with 5 or even more number of decks or layers, but we call it decks. So basically, several thousand cars drove into it and going, like multiple story buildings, and get in there. And the biggest trade is pretty typically between Germany and here, and certain specialized shipping services operate the thing. That's Ro-Ro, but there are also different type of Ro-Ro. There's actually, they don't call liner, they call regular service out of the Mediterranean area to the U.S. Gulf area. The only somehow liner service that is not container for the transatlantic trade. So this is the kind of, big trucks carrying the special cargo right into the ships, but there are only 2 layers or 2 decks, within the ship of this kind of Ro-Ro. In old days, the Chinese Minister of Transportation, he got transferred from the post of Chinese Navy commander to the Minister of Transportation. And the first thing he did, he went to Japan, and on his visit to the Japanese shipyard, he looked at the Ro-Ro ships, and he's like, wow, we could have used this for wartime. So he bought 13, one order. He dropped a big order, 13 Ro-Ro ships. And back at Costco, nobody knew how to do, or what to do with it. So they put them into the service, the feeder service that I just mentioned. So finally, back in the early 1990s, the U.S. had the invasion of Iraq, and they needed the Ro-Ro ships. And they looked into the MSC, the Military Sea Lift Command. They didn't have even one. And they couldn't, charter from the Chinese. So anyway, that was, I guess, to suit better purposes. Typically, when you go into a country where is lack of a good maritime logistic infrastructure, Ro-Ro ships serve better. It's almost like the military landing crafts. Okay, so there's a ramp on the back, in and out and all that stuff. And then we have semi-submersible ships. Semi-submersible ships are actually the biggest player around the Houston area for the oil, because that's the only ships carry the oil rigs, offshore rigs. And it is amazing. We watch how they operate. The biggest player was Duckwise. Dutch got acquired by another company, so now they changed the name. And the other big player is Costco. They have a big fleet too. I believe there are only 2 well-established players in this game. So the next slide, subcategories by ship operation service. We talked about that. liner services, regular service. Regular service, let me just give you a little bit of explanation. Regular service meaning they don't really operate on a fixed day or dates of a month, but they say, okay, typically, yeah, somewhere every 6 days, 60 days, or about 80 days, or about 45 days. Don't take them too serious about it. It's just basically, reference. So trams by charter only, meaning, hey, they don't go into any fixed route. They go anywhere you want them to go. Just pay them, make them happy. So public services of liner services and the regular services under Shipping Act. Okay, we talked about that. But pretty much if you're operating some kind of regular services in pattern, first thing first, you got to have the ports of call. Where do you go? Obviously, do you go to a small port? Lake Charles is a port. How much cargo can you pick up there? So they don't typically go there, right? So when they say common seaport, that means commonly accepted by everybody in the business as a major seaport. Nobody goes to where no cargo, they can't make money, right? So the trade routes basically with all the ports designated, connected, that becomes a trade route. And the service frequency, we talked about it. And transit time we did too. But typically transit time either means between certain ports or the entire route. Okay, how long does it take for the ship to complete this voyage? And the BSL lady would talk about it. And what else? Booking notes we did. FMC we talked about it. And yeah, I guess we can talk about the steamship agency. Okay, longshoreman, basically that's the guys handling the ship cranes or cargo on, off, load, discharge, longshoreman. In America, I want to say all of them are unionized except for in Houston they're unionized and also non-unionized. But at one specific dock, typically, it's either union or non-union. You don't really have, two different gangs working at the same place. On the West Coast, the unions, they're very strong to the point they have more power than the U.S. Coast Guard. One Chinese ship came into L.A. And they've done everything, and the Coast Guard were certified, and they were basically clear to go. But then the longshoreman in LA came to the ship and talked to the captain. You are not allowed to go. The captain said, wait. By what authority you're telling me this? I'm cleared by the U.S. government. And the union said, well, if you want to come back to this port, you better listen to me. Well, so after that, that particular branch of Costco never wanted to go into LA. So anyway, that's about the longshoreman. And then steamship agent, what do? Because the captains, the master of the ships, they don't do all this, logistic things, getting the supplies, the groceries. So the steamship agents take care of all that. And then steamship agent also, cover their whatever the ship needs, even like medical or legal, whatever, get them lawyers and all that. So that's steamship agent. And then we have the stevedores. Stevedores, basically, they are the party to do the loading, discharging, and tally, whereas the longshoremen kind of work with the stevedores. And then we have the lashing, securing services. This is for break bulk only, right? So when you have some big equipment sitting either on deck or under deck, below deck, you would have a saddle, under. And then around that, let's say a big vessel or some kind of equipment, you would have to have the rope to tie really tight, securing lashing. So, and tally agent basically tells, they do the tally sheet. They tell, what and how many were loaded, if any damages. And then you have the cargo measurement surveyors. And this, in certain countries, is very important. Like I mentioned before in the class, in Thailand, a lot of shippers, they do it in a pattern. They under-declare the weight and dimension to save on their custom duty of their own country, but the steamship lines send their ships accordingly. So the gears and the cargo space, and then nasty surprise, they can't pick them up. And that would cost the charterer or the shipper a lot of money. So that's what the measurement stevedore, the surveyors do, or inspectors, some call. Port captain already said, they basically, they're hanging around the ships during the loading, discharging, securing, lashing service operation going on. Basically a watchdog for, either, depends who hired, either the steamship lines hired, it's called owner's port captain, or the shippers hired, or charterers hired, it's called charterers or shippers port captain. Oh, okay. So here, the private charters under the Carriage of Goods by Sea Act, that's the official name for it. And the exemption from the antitrust laws that I mentioned, charter party bills of lading I mentioned, the main terms I mentioned, late can. Okay, this is a very important term. What is late can? It's late time or canceling date. So in a charter party, one of the most important terms you have to pay absolute attention to is late can, because this is the time stipulated in your charter party. So by that day, you have to tell the steamship line, is your cargo ready to be loaded at the loading port? How would you know that? Oh, supposedly you get the ship date update from the ERP of your vendor, seller, fabricator. Well, guess what? They keep updating way after you already notified the owners about late can or confirm. So once that is confirmed, the ship goes to the port. And if the fabricator tell you another 10 or 100 updates on the ship date, it's too late. You tell the steamship line, hey, wait, it's not going to work. You go there, there's nothing going to be there waiting for you to lift. And they're like, I'm sorry, you're going to have to pay me. So that's what late can is. So full liner terms, short for the FLT, short for full liner term, and then liner in, free out, free in, liner out, FIO, free in and out. That basically referring to free to who? To the steamship lines. So if you book with the steamship line with full liner term, that means all the loading, discharging is all their account, their expense, their risks. You don't worry about it, right? But if you didn't do full liner term, you do liner in, free out. Why? Because if you do liner in, free out, that means in your sales contract, your customer is going to pick up the cargo at the discharge port. So they're taking it from under the, from the ship cargo hold. So you're like, okay, I can save that money. I don't pay for the discharge. In most cases, unless you're dealing with little pennies, I fully recommend do not, walk away from full liner term, because that's safe. You can sleep better. And then the jurisdictions and laws, regulations, why would that matter? Okay, if you have some problem in the United States, okay, so if you specifically stipulated all the jurisdictions and the laws to apply is the U.S., well, then you get to, have your lawsuit, proceed in a U.S. maritime court. But if you fail to put that in, or at least you didn't insist enough, and the other guy is from Japan, and they're like, okay, we go to Japan. Well, you don't want that. Of course, if you're not a steamship line, you don't want to go to UK either. So that's why I always insist the jurisdiction, the laws and regulations, where is in your own favor. And arbitration, what is arbitration? Basically, people always say that. They say, oh, okay, let's save all this hassle of a court battle. Let's just go to arbitration. What's arbitration? There's typically three arbitrators hired who are not lawyers, not judge, but basically, people like me. I am a certified arbitrator for maritime trade disputes. So I could be hired, and it's really cheap, a couple of $1,000s a day. Then, it's a whole lot more expensive than a lawsuit in court, right? So if I'm hired by the chatterer, and then another arbitrator hired by the owner, and the third one is supposed to sit in a neutral between these two. There's no conflict of interest. So between three of us, we would reach agreement. Yes, we would say blah, blah, blah. It's almost like a judgment from a maritime judge, except for there's no, power of enforcement. We can make people to just accept it. It's a formality, I guess, before proceeding to the, legal court. So time bars, typically like 2 years. I think everybody already learned that in other classes. If you sit on this case, you don't do anything 2 years later, hey, too late to do anything anyway. So COA, we already talked about him. We're not going to repeat here again. If and when heavy lift vessels are not available. Okay, so when that thing happens, you try to find a heavy lift vessels for your particular project, and you can't find any that is suitable either for the time, for the trade route, or actually for the gear, right? So what do? Options to explore, which may or may not be good options available. One is that's a typo. It should be shore crane rather than short. Shore crane lifting capacity. I can pretty much tell you there's no shore crane lifting capacity going beyond, let's say 150 metric tons. So that is very, very small chance for the capital equipment of the heavy heavy manufacturing industry, mining industry, or oil industry, because we typically get easily 400, 600, 800, or 1,000 metric tons. So shore crane in this case, nah. But we don't know what you're shipping, right? So the float crane in the U.S. Gulf area, and this is basically borrowed in between Louisiana and Texas. They have, I think the name is called Big John. I don't remember. Either Big John or something like that. Big John, I think, was like a 300 metric tons lifting capacity, and she's busy all the time, on hire. And if you go to like a country like Brazil, my experience, I don't know the latest. My own experience, I couldn't find the shore crane or the floating crane along the shore over there. Basically, luckily though, we do have a semi-liner service going in there with the heavy lift crane. But again, this heavy lift crane is not like a jumbo, crane. 150, 200 metric ton, they consider heavy lift. Of course, it's heavier than 50. And then mobile crane, that's actually pretty wimpy in most cases. I wouldn't use that for, heavy lift capital equipment. And then they have this, gantry cranes. You see them a lot of places. Actually, I never saw any operation life operation of handling capital equipment with this kind of crane. This is really more for the steel pipes or whatever steel cargoes. Some ships, one steamship line only. I don't see any other cases. Some steamship line actually have that on their ship deck, working the steel cargo. That's the main cargo. I don't think it's good for capital equipment of heavy lift. So the St. Lawrence River passage option, I talked about it before in class. Basically, we talked about that spring thaw regulations in the upper north around the Great Lake area. Basically, somewhere like April, May, whatever, each state is different. Until then, over the winter, they won't allow heavy lift trucks going through their, area on the road surface. But if you have a project and you don't want to lose time, so what do you want to do? If it is, basically you look at the packing list, the weight, dimension, everything works, you want to hire the specific type of ships, because not all the breakbulk ships can sail through the locks on St. Lawrence River. But anyway, if that becomes a good option, what you do, you hire a ship and going up along the East Coast, passing New York State, and then going, from the ocean into the mouth of the river and sail along the river and passing through all the ship locks. And that's an option. And then from there, like I mentioned before in previous classes, that the ship could eventually go into Lake Ontario and find a private dock to dump the thing there, right? So this pretty much concludes the video of this now week 10 class. Or is it a 10 or 11? I think it should be 11 now. So there are a couple of, well, actually specific 4 YouTube videos that you are suggested to watch, which basically go hand in hand with the core contents just reviewed here, right? So do that, at least do 1, if not 2, and then submit, and I will address the all this in the following classes. So I'll see you guys next class. Have a safe home time, and don't get in trouble. All right? Ciao.